Oh, what did I do? I lost the tunes. Mike, can
Yeah.
you hear me?
I hear you.
I just killed our music. What did I do? Let's see if I can bring it back.
There it goes.
So I apologize, people. You were digging on Mike Saylor's tune. Say it again for me. I screwed the name up last time, Mike.
Trichotism.
Trichotism. Let's let this blow for the rest of the tune, and then we're going to come back and visit with Mike Saylor's here. All right. Hey, Mike. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
That's a great tune. What recording is that
Thanks.
from?
That is an Oscar Pettiford tune, actually. And I don't know the original record that's off of. I'm like so bad at remembering what tunes come from what records, but I've been playing that for a long time. And then when I put my nonet together, that was one of the first arrangements I did for it, was that tune. So I recorded that in 2015 with my nonet.
Was that up in New York? Were you up there
In
at that
New
point?
York, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
That's the
I was
band.
in
That's
New
the band we
York.
heard when I was up there with Christopher, and we came out to see you
Yeah,
guys.
that's right. That's right. At the Django, we had a residency there for almost 4 years, and still had it up until the pandemic started. So hopefully we'll have it. Hopefully it'll survive, and we'll have it after the pandemic subsides. But yeah,
Oh, yeah. Tough stuff we're going through right now.
yeah, man.
A lot of
Yeah,
weird pivoting to try to figure out how to remain creative and keep your art out there, right? Just like tonight, I was thinking we would have come on earlier, but I noticed Tommy Howard was doing a live from Monks, the quartet.
yeah. I caught some of it.
Yeah, he sounded
Yeah.
great, didn't he?
Yeah, he ended on "Bird of Beauty." I love that song. I've always wanted to play that tune. It's like, man, I love that song. I'm glad he did it. So,
I missed that. I'm
um,
going to go back and watch the replay. I just caught part of it and then I had to run, but it sounded
yeah,
wonderful. I had it up on the television, and it was a fun way to check him out.
yeah, right.
Everybody
Yeah,
playing in masks. Glad there weren't any horn
I
players.
know. Yeah, I know. I did one of those a couple weeks ago, and it's cool. I hadn't played a gig in like 9 weeks, so I was so rusty. But it's cool that Colin's doing that, and they've got a little money to throw to the band. It's nice. It's nice that they're doing that.
Yeah. I want to apologize to both Mike and everybody. I was in a huge hurry tonight. I'd been working in the yard, and I ran in, and I was unprepared to do this, but I really wanted to do it with Mike. And we spent the first half hour trying to remember how to get the audio back to Mike so he could hear his own tunes. And then the other half, and because I was in a rush, I had been planning on having a show with Carmen Bradford, the great singer, lives down in Atlanta, former Austinite, and sang with Count Basie for so many years. And we've postponed that. She's in the middle of a big project, and we're going to do something later in the fall. But I had
Cool.
written her in the description, and with the plan of that being the next show, and I'd forgotten to update the description, so the post is wrong. The title says Mike, but the description says Carmen. So just think
It's
Mike.
good company, though. I
Yeah,
love Carmen. I
yeah.
actually have never met her, but I've heard her sing a couple times. She's amazing.
Yeah, she's terrific,
she's
man.
great.
She was
Hmm.
she was at Houston Tillotson when I was at University of Texas.
Okay.
I think she was there. All I know is she was. I think she was, and I know she was in town, and I got to meet her then and played some with her ahead of the gig at the Paramount when she opened with a quartet for Count Basie, and it was.
Oh, was that when she got the gig?
It wasn't long after that gig that she went on the road with him.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's
And
awesome.
I guess her family's history. Her father played with Count Basie, and
Yeah, I did know that.
Bobby, and I think her mother sang with Count Basie at one point too. I think
Oh, wow.
Dr. James Polk was telling me about it. But anyway,
Huh.
quite a pedigree there.
Yeah, I
Um,
caught her with Basie at Birdland. Gosh, when was it? Maybe not even a year ago. She sounded terrific. I mean, yeah, she sounded terrific.
It's nice. Some friends are joining in. Jen Jarkey. Jen, I've never actually. I don't think I've ever pronounced your last name. I hope I didn't do anything bad to it. Anyway, Jan's great. She's a good friend. I met her at IBM, and she's come out to a lot of gigs and been supportive and tuned into some of these. Mike McIntosh joining as well. Good to have you guys, and thanks for the comments. Mike, for some of these folks, I would imagine many of them know who you are, but some of them may not. And maybe you could give us a little quick, where you come from and what brought you back to Austin recently.
Sure. I'm from North Carolina originally, where I was born in South Carolina, and I went from there to Michigan, and then I went to school at Michigan State and studied with the great Rodney Whitaker, who was bass player with Roy Hargrove's quintet in the 90s, was the bass player in the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then I came to UT in, I guess, 2010, I think, and then did 2 years, and then moved with my then girlfriend, now wife, to New York, and was in New York for around 8 years, and then just came back this past September. I got offered a job at UT in the jazz department. So before the pandemic, I was going back and forth essentially at least once a month to play and work, and I still have a lot of sideman stuff that's based out of there, and so it was keeping me really busy up until the pandemic. So I was in Taiwan, coming back from a gig in Taipei when they closed the borders. So I was like on one of the last flights out before they closed the borders. So, my wife's from Austin, and I really loved Austin when I was here before New York. And if I'm going to live anywhere that's not New York, I want it to be here because it's a great place to live. It's a great place to play. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I met Mike, for those listening, fairly recently in the last couple of years, and just have loved his playing. And then, as he mentioned a bit ago, I heard his medium-sized group. How many did you say it was?
Nine.
Nine?
It's 9.
So what do you call that? A what tet?
A nonet.
A nonet. A nonet.
Yeah.
Wonderful band playing. Was that all originals or original arrangements as well by you? Or?
It's all arrangements and originals. It's a lot of tunes that I just have always played with my small group. And then a lot of tunes that I'd say the book is probably 20% originals and the rest is all original arrangements, but there's nothing in the book that anybody else composed or arranged. That's all from my pen.
Yeah, great stuff. Just beautiful. And what a fun setting that club we heard you in up there. I hope that place is surviving the shutdown.
Man,
do you know anything
me too.
About
that? I don't know. They've been doing live stream stuff.
Oh, really?
They actually have 2. I don't know if you remember, but they have 2 clubs in that hotel. I think at the time you all got there, the other one had stopped for the night, but there's a lot of people who play. I mean, they employ a lot of musicians. So, gosh, I hope they make it, because there's not a lot of places where a nonet or a full big band can play in New York. I mean, it pays decent and it has a good stage. So I hope they pull through.
Yeah, these are strange times, and it's going to be really interesting to find this is lasting long enough that it's certainly altering the landscape in many ways, and hopefully we can hold together that cultural fabric that's so critical to the health of communities. I guess if we lose places, then we're going to have to figure out how to support the opening of new ones, to take their places.
Right.
But prayers for and thoughts to everybody that's dealing with us on all sides of the spectrum, the club owners, the staff of the clubs, the musicians, the people that support the musicians, with the gear and everything along that whole path of activity, and commerce.
Yeah, I saw a chart. When I was based full time in New York, I played on Broadway on several shows, and somebody had done a schematic of all the money that's lost now that there's no Broadway shows. And so I have a ton of friends who they make the majority of their living playing on Broadway shows, and the economic impact to the city is something like $16 billion. I mean, it's it's such a huge amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars every day that the delis lose, and then it just goes on down the line. It's crazy, man. Some places are gonna close, and some places will make it, and then new places will open up. I don't know. I'm optimistic about that stuff. The only thing we can do is just the club owners and the musicians. We just have to hold on. Just
We have to.
It'll
don't
come
we?
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah, we have to.
We have to. I mentioned this on another podcast, but somebody I was reading said optimism is the true moral courage, and I thought, that's a good way to look at it.
That is a good way to look at it.
We have to have the courage to be optimistic, no matter what is
Mm-hmm.
going on, and there's a lot that needs our courage and optimism right now on many fronts. Right.
Absolutely.
Let's play another
Absolutely.
tune, man. What should we roll next?
Why don't we play Cheek to Cheek? And I can tell everybody a little bit about it.
Yeah, please do.
So my main working band of the past couple of years has been that Nontet. And in New York, there's so many big bands, and the big bands are great places to meet people. That's, I feel like, the best thing about them is that the communal aspect of meeting people and impressing somebody, and then they call you for a gig, or meeting other people and then you call them. And so I love listening to big bands and checking out big bands, and I love writing for the Nontet and a full orchestra. And I really like replicating music from like the 40s and 50s and early 60s, like New York big band sounds. And so this actually has a vocalist on it, a really talented vocalist named Vanessa Pereira. And so it's just 9 horns, but I try my best to make it sound like a full orchestra. So this is my arrangement featuring Vanessa Pereira on Cheek to Cheek.
All right. And is there a name of this recording that people can go and purchase it, or is this?
It's not. So none of this stuff is released,
none
unfortunately.
of it's released. Okay.
Yeah, when I recorded it, I just was sort of documenting it. I might, hopefully one day I'll release it, but right now it's just on my website.
I usually put up a PayPal.me link for people that want to do a virtual tip bucket for guests. Do you have a PayPal.me link?
I do. I can send it to you in the chat.
Why don't you do that? And I'm going to roll the tune, throw up the name of the tune, and then I'll add that link on the screen, and we'll just leave it up the whole time once you give it to me. Okay?
Cool.
Okay, here's Cheek to Cheek.
Heaven, I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I seek when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. Heaven, I'm in heaven, and the cares that hung around me through the week seem to vanish like a gambler's lucky streak when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I'd like to climb a mountain and to reach the highest peak, but it doesn't thrill me half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, I'd love to go out fishing in a river or a creek, but I wouldn't enjoy it half as much as dancing cheek to cheek. Oh, baby, dance with me. I want my arm about you. The charm about you will carry me through to heaven. I'm in heaven, and my heart beats so that I can hardly speak, and I seem to find the happiness I see when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. When we're out together dancing, when we're out together dancing, when we're out together dancing cheek to cheek. Cheek to cheek.
Nice, nice. Oh, she's
Thanks,
good.
man. Yeah, she's burning. She's so good. Her husband is actually the trombone player on this recording too, and he's also super killing. They must be the most talented married couple in New York. Vanessa Bray and Rob Edwards. They're both totally burning. So
It's a wonderful swinging group of tunes, man, and the sound, the arrangements, the recording is great too. Was this stuff done in a typical studio, or did you do it in a performance space, or how'd you do it?
no, we did it in this studio called Rift Studios. It's in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. It's actually the guy that does it. His name is Tom Gardner. The studio, they mostly have like hip hop artists. Like Chromeo is the guy who most famously records there all the time. And when I started recording there, I did another record with one of my good friends, Jason Prover. We did a soundtrack for a BBC documentary, and it was really close to where I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And I walked in, and it's not really much to it, but it's just a really big room with a really nice piano. And so I wanted to record this band, but I didn't want to do it separated. I wanted everybody to be in the same room, and I didn't want to deal with an engineer who was like try to sway me any other way, you know. And so I asked him. I said, "Hey, man, I have this band. It's 6 horns and rhythm. Like, you know, what's your rate?" He had a great day rate, so I just like got 2 days, and I think we recorded 18 tunes, I think, something like that.
Nice.
So yeah.
And how long? How many days? Did you
2.
say? 2. 18 in 2 days. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. But the band had been working. Luckily, this band has always worked. It started as like the sort of house big band at the McKittrick Hotel, which is a Broadway show called Sleep No More. And I was the music director of the Broadway show at the time. And this band would play every Sunday. And so we had been playing a ton, you know, and so it was pretty easy. You know, the band's worked enough at this point where like the old arrangements like this one is one of the original ones, like the, you know, band can play this in its sleep at this point, which is super rare for a big band, you know, to be, you know, rehearsed and ready to go.
Did you do a lot of Broadway work in New York while you were
a
there?
fair amount. A fair amount. I got into it the last 4 years I was there. I mean, I got really lucky with that Sleep No More gig. And I got that after I'd been in town for maybe 2.5 years. And actually, it's an Austin connection how I got it. I don't know if you remember that club Momo's.
Yeah.
So the guy who owned that is a guy named Paul Oviace. I don't know if you ever remember seeing him around, but he's back in Austin now. He owns he owns something around here, a restaurant or something. Anyway, him and the manager of Momo's was a guy named Jack Martin, and he was a guitar player, or is a guitar player. They were working at Sleep No More at the time, but before that they owned a club called Zerzeman, which was in the exact same location that the old Zinc Bar was at on Houston. And they had Zerzeman, they wanted to do like a jam session, and so they knew me. They asked me if I'd do this jam session at Zerzeman. I started doing that, and then they both sort of just like something happened with like they sold the club or something, Zerzeman, and they started working at this Broadway show, Sleep No More, and they were going to start a restaurant at the show, and so they needed a band to play 7 nights a week.
Wow. And
they called me, and so like I had been in New York for 2 years, and now all of a sudden I had a gig that was like 7 nights a week. I was like, this is honestly probably the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It like allowed me to, you know, I was making ends meet, but it was, you know, it was a little tenuous there for a while. But, you know, I got way better right
So
off
fast,
the bat. I mean, I played like 30 nights in a row before I subbed the show out,
Wow.
because the show, it wasn't like a normal Broadway show. It was just a band playing tunes. And I hired all these people that were better than me, and they wanted all these 1930 and 1940s type songs. And so, now I play a lot of that stuff, but back then I didn't really know a lot about that music. And so I learned so much. There was no charts or iPads or anything like that. I just was learning tunes during the day. I would try to learn like 5 or 6 tunes, and then call them on this, on the bandstand. They all knew a lot of more tunes than I did. And so I got so much better in the first 2 or 3 months of that gig. And I ended up doing it for 3 years. And then after that, I started doing more like traditional type Broadway shows where you sit in the pit and then you play to the show,
Which you said hired players better than me. That's the rule, right?
Man, you got to.
You not only is that the rule if you're sending a sub, send somebody at least as good as you are, if not better. But if you want to play with people that stretch you, right?
Oh, yeah, you got to. I mean, it wasn't hard for me. I was really not good when I moved to New York. I was like I feel like I was talented at the instrument, but playing jazz and particularly improvising, like I was really behind, and so those guys really kicked my ass really hard, and the people that I first hired on that show, we're still really close friends, like the guitar player, Sam Raderman, who was Freddie Cole's guitar player up until Freddie just passed a couple days ago. We would be on a break and he would be showing me how to play, like the last 8 bars of T for Two. Like, okay, no, it's like this. And it's, so it was great for me. That gig literally was the best thing that ever happened to me artistically and financially. It got me, happen financially.
That's a great story, because you can go to New York and struggle for a very long time to find.
Yeah.
You can never find something like that in any city
it opened
you're
up
in,
doors
so,
for me. It opened up doors for me that it would have taken me 15 years to open if I hadn't. It all was from Austin too. It was all from Jack and Paul, the guys who ran Momo's. I wouldn't have got it if I didn't know those guys. So
serendipity, man.
Yeah, most
definitely.
Good
thing. Hey, let's play another one. What's up next? What do you want to hear?
Let's do let's play Bohemia After Dark.
Okay.
So this is not my band, but it's with a band I've played for. I've known the leader of the band, George Delancey, who's an incredible bass player. We went to school at Michigan State together and were roommates for a bit. And he was in New York for around 10 years and then just recently got out right before the pandemic. But he has a band that is sort of similar size to my Nontet, except it has a couple more horns. And he was the bass player on Trichotism, who took that solo, by the way.
That's great.
Great arranger, great composer, like virtuosic bass player, like really, really incredible. And so I've done a couple records with him, and this recording has got Tadadaka Uno, who was Roy Hargrove's last piano player, Lawrence Leathers, who was a really incredible drummer who just passed a couple years ago. Really, really great band. And so this was like the first track on the album, the Bohemia After Dark.
All right. And the name of the album was
It's called it's called Paradise.
Paradise. And the name of the album is Paradise, and it was it was another band that you were in, right?
So it's the band leader is George Delancey.
Okay.
So I'm a sideman on this project.
Okay. And Paradise, is this something people can find if they want to go look for it? Is it a released product? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I put up paypal.me/Mike Sailors on the screen. That's the virtual tip bucket from Mike. And I'm glad Mike McIntosh reminded me to do this. Thank you, Mike. This is something I want to do every time I have players on. We're living in this difficult time with no places to play live, and everything's happening virtually. So anything you can do to kick in a little something to show Mike some love, he appreciates it, and I do too.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you, by the way, are you doing any more streaming performances anytime soon that you want to let people know about?
I
Any
was
plans?
supposed to be doing one on Friday. I had I was doing like a Mike Sailors with Strings thing at Collins' shop, East Austin Piano Shop. Give them a like on Facebook if you see them. But with the spiking cases, we decided to push it to August 13th. So hopefully we'll do it on August 13th, and that's going to be me with a rhythm section and then 4 strings. So I did all these arrangements of all these beautiful old tunes that I like,
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll do that, but it's on August 13th at East Austin Piano Shop.
Okay, sounds good. I've had this idea of getting together. I've got a few of these starting to generate. We'll see if they actually happen or not. But taking some kind of shell of a tune, maybe something I create in Logic, maybe with some sequence stuff, play some drums, send them around to friends, have them add parts,
Oh, that's awesome.
And try to just build some stuff virtually that way that over a week or two, and then premiere it on something like this,
Yeah, man. Call me. I'm down to do that.
I would love to have you play on some of this stuff. And we're going to have to be creative like this, right? To keep the juices flowing, to keep the product out there, to stay inspired and to keep creating, because so many of those traditional ways of sharing what we do it's not available to us right now, right? So
absolutely,
so it's important.
absolutely.
Here's Bohemia After Dark. We're going to let you listen to this. We'll be right back, and hit that PayPal me link if you can for Mike. We appreciate that. Okay, see you in a second. Very nice.
Yeah, man.
That's crisp.
It's a hard arrangement. Man.
That's moving along.
Yeah,
Mike,
it's
you can't
yeah,
see
that was,
in Mike McIntosh's comments. He's really digging it. He said
oh, good.
he loved it.
Yeah, we rehearsed for that record. Ah, man, we probably had 10 rehearsals for that recording session. I mean, that's hard. You know, luckily that band it's been a band for a while, and every single person that's that band, all the horn players, most everybody, we all went to Michigan State, so we've been playing with each other for a long time. The only people that weren't our school pals were Lawrence went to school at Michigan State too. Rob Edwards, the trombone player, and Tadetaka Uno, who's the pianist on that. So we've played together a lot. So to play stuff like that, you gotta know the cats.
Oh, that's tough.
You gotta know each other, man.
It's not just knowing the figures and having them down technically.
Yeah.
For it to swing like that and to blend so beautifully, you all have to be in the same headspace. That's really
exactly.
cool.
Exactly.
What is some of the as a trumpet player, coming up? It's a cliche question, but talk about some of your favorites. Some of the people inspired you the most a little bit.
Like people my age?
Well, I mean, when you first you talked about when you went to New York is when you really started to work hard on the jazz chops, right? So,
right.
I mean, which leads me to think that up to that point, you've got a classical background as well, right? Because you sound like somebody who's really shedded that part of your instrument.
Yeah, before I even moved to Texas, I was trying to be a lead trumpet player, and so, and not trying, just being the lead trumpet player, because I've always been able to play the instrument fairly well and have a good high register and all that stuff. So even in New York, I did a lot of stuff playing lead trumpet. But I mean, as far as influences go, Louis Armstrong is definitely the top for me. I love everything he does. I love the way he does it. I love the way he looks while he's doing it. I love the way he sings. I mean, to me, he's just the pinnacle of artistic expression with a trumpet, When I was a kid, my first jazz trumpet listening was Wynton Marsalis, like a lot of people, I would imagine. So a lot of my introductory listening was like, him, and then Art Blakey, because he played with Art Blakey, and then checking out Ron Carter and Herbie Hancock because they played with Wynton in the 80s, and then checking out Miles and kind of going backwards like that. Yeah. My whole listening and, education has always been sort of going back, instead of starting at the beginning, like probably you should do. But I was always sort of, I remember when I was in college, I checked out that record. I don't know if you know this record, Better Go. There's a guy, Harry Sweets Edison, on it.
Well, I know Harry Sweets, yeah.
Yeah, it was like a seminal jazz record, and I had never even heard of Sweets Edison. And I was like a junior in college. I was like, shit, man. It's a lot of stuff I don't know, So I was, I've always been sort of just going backwards rather than starting at the beginning. I think you should start at the beginning, but you got to have a good teacher.
Well, and who can? I mean, that rarely happens, right? Unless you're initially approaching it almost with an academic mindset, right? I'm going to study this as a historical thing. If you're drawn to the art of it, then you come in at whatever port of entry that presents itself to you, that appeals to you, and then from there you go back down the river, maybe.
Yeah,
or back up the river, But,
yeah, for sure. I mean, my first introductory to jazz was like through big band, playing in the middle school or the high school jazz orchestra, and so yeah, that's always been my favorite. Like my passion is like playing in large ensembles and writing for large ensembles, and like now one of the sideman gigs I have is playing with Bobby Sanabria's Afro-Latin jazz, multiverse jazz orchestra. And so, which is so cool because it's like a full jazz orchestra with like percussionists. And I mean, it's like a huge orchestra, Those are my favorite memories of playing so far, and favorite experiences of playing with like big sounds like that, I mean, I love playing small group too, but So I'm really influenced by big bands and but Louis Armstrong for sure. I spent a lot of time listening to Freddie Hubbard, as most trumpet players do.
Yeah, yeah.
My favorite trumpet player from that era, though, like Freddie's era, is Kenny Dorham. Kenny Dorham is like my man, and so
who spent time in Austin.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I didn't even realize that until I'd been in Austin for like a year or something. Before I moved to New York. I know he was amongst trumpet players. When you talk to like the real cats, they all will list Kenny Dorham as like a main influence. Everybody lists Freddie Hubbard as an influence because was so popular and his trumpet chops set him apart from everybody. But like Kenny Dorham on an intellectual level, the way he played, he started on tenor saxophone. Did you know that?
No.
I think that influences how he played the trumpet, because he plays things on the trumpet that are just no one else plays these kind of angular ideas. They're very un-trumpet-like sometimes.
Reminds me of Benny Golson, who played both. Benny
Carter.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Same thing though. Benny Carter would play stuff on the alto that was like, man, what's that?
Yeah. What is it, 5th grade when we usually start band, at least back when I was a kid. I don't know if it starts earlier now, but 5th grade was about when they asked us to kind of pick an instrument, and they began to work us into band in grade school. And my dad had a trumpet, so he said, we had a cornet, so he said, this is what you're going to play. I didn't get a choice. So I started playing the cornet, and then I eventually got a trumpet, and I played trumpet all the way through high school.
I didn't know that, but I'm seeing the trumpet in the corner of the screen now. What is that?
This is an old. I asked John.
It's like an old Martin.
What do you think this is? It's in terrible shape. But
turn it sideways. It looks like an old Martin.
Does it?
But maybe not. I don't know. It should say on the bell.
It's everything's massaged off. It doesn't have anything written anywhere anymore. I asked John. I've been wanting to fiddle around with it again and just see if I can play some long notes or whatever for recording stuff. And I asked John Blondell if he had one, because he has so many instruments, moving them around and buying and selling. And he brought this one to me, and he just gave it to me. And it needs some work, but, one valve sticks a tiny bit, but it's not too bad. I'm afraid to blow through it yet because I don't know what's living inside of it.
Definitely clean it for sure.
It may have been the source of COVID for all we know, but I'm going to try to get it cleaned up and see if I can play it again. But I played trumpet all the way through high school, and in the first time I was in jazz band in high school, in Amarillo, Texas, of all places, which actually had a pretty cool jazz band. It was a huge part of my musical growth was those few years in high school playing in that band. But the first year nobody knew anything about jazz except the band director happened to have a background. He was a good trumpet player, Mike Harris, who is in Houston now. But he gave me the jazz chair when I was a sophomore, and I couldn't play changes or anything. But if it was maybe a 8-bar break and there were only maybe 2 or 3 chords, then I could figure out how to make my way through them. But mostly I knew how to be rhythmical as a jazz player. How to phrase, because of listening to so much jazz growing up, and the trumpet players that I loved were, Miles, of course. My dad had a great jazz record collection, so I was exposed to it early. Clark Terry, I loved Clark Terry. Chet Baker, and then the big band albums, the Basie records, the Woody Herman albums, the Stan Kenton albums, Marvin Stamm. That I remember him sticking out to me as a soloist that was in Kenton's band. And I don't know if he's still around, but I knew that he was still playing in New York in the 80s and 90s when I was up there.
He was super
sometimes,
heavy
yeah.
in New York in the 80s and 90s,
Really?
in the studio scene. Yeah, he lives upstate now. I don't think he plays much in the city anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
if he would have been playing in the city when I was there, I would have made a point to go see him. I've met him a couple times. He doesn't know me, but I've met him a couple times at like jazz band festivals or something. He's like he's a fixture on the adjudication scene, you know.
Okay.
But I would imagine
he's
got
probably what, 75, 80? I mean, he's up there probably, right?
at least, yeah,
Yeah,
at
maybe,
least.
yeah.
He was touring for a while with a quartet with like Ed Soph and a couple other people, like a really good band. But he's I don't want to talk about people's finances, but he's probably done so many sessions in New York. He's got a huge pension. I mean, he's like probably super set, you know.
Wow, and is that in the New York Musicians Union? There were solid pensions set up for cats that were involved in the scene over the long haul, I assume.
Some of these guys, not everybody, but some of these guys and ladies, they're super set. But because not only are they, you know, like for instance, you know, they did a lot of work, probably unionized, and back then in the 60s and 70s and 50s, you know, most of the work was unionized. Nowadays, I mean, I'm still in the union in New York, but it really only matters if you play on Broadway, the New York Phil, the Met Opera, or Jazz at Lincoln Center, or certain gigs that are unionized. But back then, you know, you probably were paying, I don't know, $200 a month in rent, and then making all this money playing, doing, you know, a session a day, 2 sessions a day, doing something at night, playing a Broadway show. But back in the 70s, you know, the Broadway scene was like, that was for the scrubs.
Yeah.
No one wanted to do a Broadway show back then because that's not where the money was, you know. Nowadays, like, that's the gig in town if you're trying to, you know, own an apartment and put 2 kids through college, and because it's still possible. But you know,
yeah,
those people that did those were really active in the 70s and 80s when the recording scene was in New York. They're set, you know. They're super set. So
I just added to right above the PayPal me link. I just added Mike Saylor's pension fund, so people will realize that Mike and young jazz players and instrumentalists like himself, composers, people in the scene, whether it's New York or Austin or anywhere, the pension fund thing is less a reality now than it used to be, and as it is for most people in corporate America and just about any gig. I mean, I think the only people that get pensions anymore are people in government, right? I mean, that's just,
you know,
actually,
if I stay at UT long enough, I will have a pension. I know that's shocking, but
well, academia then, yeah.
yeah, that was, you know, but you know, the financial aspect of being a musician these days it's not impossible. I don't know. It's a really hard. It's not that it's a hard conversation to have, but it's just so complex, you know, because there's so many different routes to take to make a living playing, you know. So I always tell people who ask me about making a living, you know, if you go to New York and you make your way through the different scenes and you stay there long enough, like, you can make a lot of money playing there. I mean, you can make a lot of money playing. It's just, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you have to be super versatile, and you've got to be, you know, wanting to play on Broadway and to be able to survive on a Broadway show. That, you know, just part of a Broadway show is just getting your butt in the seat. The other part is like not pissing anybody off and not, you know, messing your part up too much to stay there. But, you know, before the pandemic, I mean, there's so many gigs in New York, you know, there's just so much stuff to do there, that it's possible, you know, there's tons of people doing well for themselves just playing there. And the same thing with Austin. There are people that are playing here that are doing it. So
I think we're at one of those.
Pension, you know, but a pension is, you know, that's a whole other, you know, it's an unlikely scenario for the, you know, 99% of musicians. If you're on Broadway in New York, you'll have a pension. if you put in enough time on it, you'll have a small pension, but nothing like those people had in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I mean, nothing like that.
Oh, yeah. And so many corporations moved to 401ks, and those take a different kind of discipline, and, they're vulnerable to things like, COVID-19 shutdowns of the economy and subsequent collapse or whatever. But back to our moral courage of optimism. We're just going to find a way, right? We're going to find a way to keep being positive and keep moving forward, and musicians like yourself keep making music, because it brings a smile to people's hearts, and
man, I think we're going to be cool, man. I really like. About this stuff, I feel I'm very optimistic. It's funny. I had like a day about a week ago where I was like being super pessimistic, and I was venting to my wife about it. and then like an hour later, I was like thinking like, well, I'm already too far down this path to do something else. Like I'm just gonna have to stick this out, And when the recession hit, I was living in Michigan. And the recession hit Michigan particularly hard. And it's part of the reason why I moved to Austin, because I had friends who were, making a ton of money playing here. And so if we could get through the recession, we can get through this, man. It's, we're going to be cool. We got to get a vaccine. We got to get a vaccine. Once we get a vaccine, the stuff's going to come back. They're already starting to play gigs again in New York, like outdoor gigs. On these restaurants and whatnot. And so a couple of my friends who have done some of these gigs, they are telling me that like not only are people crowding, at a safe distance around the band to hear the music, and these are just like jazz trios, people coming out of their windows like on 7th Avenue and like checking the music out, because people are just so starved for music, So it's going to come back, and I think it's going to come back in a big way, but musicians we got to find a way to get through it.
I think you're right. I think once we're able to start getting out again, there's going to be a groundswell of hunger for hearing live music again, because
I put money on.
Yeah, and we all miss being together. We're social animals. We miss seeing each other and feeling the energy of being around other people. This is cool. Zoom is cool. All that stuff is nice. It's better than nothing, but it doesn't take the place of being in each other's presence.
Right.
And musicians playing together, musicians interacting with an audience interacting with each other and us. I mean, that's all very important stuff.
Yeah, we won't take it for granted, that's for sure. Or at least not initially. I mean, I'm definitely not going to be complaining about gigs for the first, 2 or 3 weeks.
I have an idea for a product. I think a Harman mute with a HEPA filter built into it. And then you can just play all your gigs with a Harman in, and then, everybody will have to bring the volume down, but then you'll never have to worry about blowing anything on anybody. So.
Well, the trumpet's cool, man, because not a lot of air goes through it. And so I know what people, when you hear it, it sounds like a bunch of air is going through it, but like a very small amount of air actually is going through it. So it's kind of like the perfect social distancing instrument,
Yeah, I got to think like a saxophone must be the opposite. There must be a whole lot of air moving through that.
I guess, yeah. Someone told me the flute is the worst.
Yeah, oh yeah. All
you're
that blowing
across the instrument hole and not into it, So
you're just shooting straight at whoever is sitting out there in front of you,
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it was hard to be a professional flute player before this, and God knows how this is going to make it harder.
Yeah, Ron Burgundy's flute playing career may be over at this point.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
So let's play another one. What do you think?
Let's do what's it called? Happy Feet Blues. Go back to my nonet.
Happy Feet Blues. Want to set it up?
Yeah. So Happy Feet Blues is actually a composition by Wynton Marsalis, and he wrote this for his septet. And my arrangement of it is essentially a pretty verbatim, just like lift, except for my band's instrumentation. And then once you get sort of in the middle of the tune, I added a whole bunch of other stuff. So it features. Who's it featured? That trombonist Rob Edwards I mentioned excuse me, that I mentioned before, and also Caleb Curtis on alto saxophone.
All right. So I'll throw the name up by Wynton, and then I'll throw up another line that says performed by the Mike Saylor's.
Performed and arranged by myself.
By Mike Saylor's nonet. How do I spell that? Nonet?
T.
That's it?
Yeah.
Nonet. Is that a real word, or did you make that up?
No, that's a real word.
That's a real word.
Yeah. Like septet is 7, octet is 8, nonet 9.
See, I'm learning new things every day.
Tentet is a dectet. I don't know what 11 is.
I call this podcast the grammatical education of Scott Lanningham. So.
Yeah.
Happy Feet Blues. Here we go. What
so
is?
that drummer. Oh,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please. You go ahead.
That drummer. So that's, you know, since I've had this band, I basically just hire like my friends, you know, and so which is like such a great part about New York. There's so many good people, and you get close with people. And
Yeah.
that drummer is one of my very best friends. His name's Aaron Kimmel, and this guy, I hope he's not watching right now because like I don't want to like give him too much props, but this guy, he's like so amazing. He grew up like around all these jazz legends. Like he has photos of him with like all these cats like Louis Bellson and just, you know, his dad was a person that knew a lot of jazz musicians, and he grew up in the Midwest, and he was around all these people that were on the road all the time. And so he was like a prodigy essentially at the drums. And he's one of these guys who is like has encyclopedic knowledge of recordings, you know. And so I'll get an email from him, and it'll be like a Dropbox link of some bootleg, you know, recording of like Art Blakey in Japan from like 1953 that like who knows how he got it, you know. But he's so musical and like swings so hard, and like, man, he can play in a big band better than like most people alive. He just knows how to play in a big band and set everything up real tasty. Doesn't really play super hard and loud, but can just like, you know, it's like when the band went into swing behind that trombone solo, like, man, he just can put his foot up the band's ass so hard. It's like, man, it's so inspiring to play with someone like that. He's really a special guy. And he plays in Benny Green's trio. That's like his main gig now, before the pandemic. So like that's his gig. So Aaron Kimmel is like a really, really great drummer.
Beautiful player, man. Great player.
Super burning.
It proves that point again that you were making earlier. Just there's so many good players, there's so much. And the thing is, there's so many people that can play the same music and always bring something different to it. You know, that's
absolutely.
That's one of the most wonderful things about that, about being a part of the jazz experience, right? Is
absolutely.
What a great open-ended universal platform for tapping into the soul of it all and
absolutely.
Experiencing that sense of community that you get to experience when you're playing together like that. That's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
What is the history of the of the nonet? Oh, I said tet. See, I put it. You can't see it. I put it up on screen. I put one too many T's in there. I've got to fix my note. Nonet, not the nontet.
Sure,
which
right.
would mean an entirely different thing. But
you're right.
What is the history of the nonet? I mean, was there a period of jazz where that size band was common, or is that just something that's always kind of been around in some form or another, as kind of a big band light or something? You know. Right.
Well, you know, back in the 20s and 30s, when you hear that term, the territory band, this was the instrumentation of those territory bands, except there would usually be in some bands there would also be a violin, and the violin would normally be covered by like one of the trumpet players. Back then, one of the trumpet players in these bands would routinely be asked to double on the violin. And that's why you see some of these trumpet players from that day, they could play the violin, like Ray Nance could play the violin, a great trumpet player who played with Duke Ellington. So these bands that weren't as big as like Basie and Duke Ellington in the 30s, you know, the territory bands were like the very first cover bands, and they would be playing in their territories, and they would play the hits of the big bands that were popular. And so they would have scaled down arrangements of whatever was, you know, whatever the popular dance song was. And so so there's a lot of history behind this exact instrumentation. There's 2 trumpets, 1 trombone, and 3 saxophones and rhythm. And even if you go farther back to like New Orleans, like the very first bands, like Jelly Roll Morton's bands, it was kind of a similar instrumentation. And like the Cotton Club Orchestra, Duke Ellington, like in the late 20s, was sort of something similar to this instrumentation. I think they might have had 1 more trumpet. Now, I first heard about this instrumentation because I played with a guy named George G. in New York. And George G., is like one of the last people in the world who's a professional big band leader or a professional band leader. George G does not play an instrument. He just leads the band.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so he has a regular gig at this place called Swing 46 on 46 between 8th and 9th on Tuesdays and some other Fridays of the month. And he had a lot of success in the late 80s and 90s leading like a full big band, but has since, he still does stuff with a full big band, but most of his stuff is with a band that's exactly the size of my band. And that's where I got the idea to put this band together, because I was subbing in his band a lot. It's 2 trumpets, 1 trombone, 3 saxophones, rhythm, and a vocalist. And so I was playing in that band a lot, subbing for the great Freddie Hendrix, who plays with everybody nowadays, but he's like on the road a bunch. And so I was playing with that band a ton for like maybe 3 years, and I'm having so much fun. It's such a versatile sound. It can sound like a big band, but it also can sound like a small group. It just depends on how you orchestrate for it. So I put the band together because of that, and then I started finding other bands that had that same exact instrumentation. And the great Slide Hampton, I don't know if you know that guy, Slide Hampton, great trombone player.
Yeah.
He had an octet in the 60s that was the same exact instrumentation. And so there's been a couple people. Tad Dameron had put together bands that were nonets or maybe dectets. But there's a ton of big band records that came out of New York in like the late 50s, early 60s that were these sort of condensed big bands. The arrangers and composers were writing for these smaller bands like they were big bands, but they might have been like, maybe 2 trumpets, 2 trombones, 4 saxophones, or 3 trumpets, 1 trombone, 5 saxophones, like these smaller type instrumentations. So it's super fun to play and write for a band that size, because it can really do anything. It can sound like a big band. It can sound like a small group. So, and there's like less mouths to feed. So
I was going to say,
everybody gets paid more.
I was going to say, if anybody was traveling right now with a band like that, it's easier to fit that band on one bus, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah,
a full big band. Can you believe that those guys used to travel? We realize how spoiled we are now if we go somewhere and we're on these modern tour buses with these great bunks and everything. Back then, they were just like a Greyhound bus, and they would just sit up, and sleep with their head propped up against the glass or whatever, and just packed in there. It's just it's amazing.
I don't know. Part of me wishes I could have got a taste of that, but I'm sure. I toured really hard for like 3 years and like luxuriously toured, compared to those standards, and like. By the end of it, I was like so sick of it. So God knows what it must have been like to just live in a bus seat, but it would have been cool to get a little bit of it, but not too much.
The very end of the big swing era bands, those that had survived into the 70s, like Woody Herman and Basie and Stan Kenton and maybe Ralph Martiri, some of these other bands that were still playing around that time. Don Ellis, he wasn't a swing era band, but I saw those the kinds of, to keep those bands going on the road, they had to play so much, and they had to play for every nice concert hall, Paramount Theater, or whatever kind of gig they did. They probably did a high school gymnasium here and a country club there and an Elks Club dance there, right? And I saw when I was in high school in Amarillo, 76, 77, 78, I saw Woody Herman at the Amarillo Country Club. I saw Stan Kenton. Basie came through there. When I saw Woody Herman's band, it was the trumpet section had Dennis Dotson and Alan Vizzuti.
Oh, wow.
And the trombone section, I think Jim Pugh was still playing with him at the time, and great saxophone section. Joe Lovano was in the sax section.
Yeah.
The drummer was Jeff Hamilton. So it was incredible band, and they're playing woodchopper's ball for all these octogenarians, that are kind of trying to keep it going all the way through the song, and they'd get to the end, and some old guy'd hold up his hand and say, "Play another beat so I could put my foot down," something like that.
Yeah, right.
And and then they would split for the night, and at least a couple of times we would sneak in guys in the high school band to listen to these guys because we were listening to the records they were making now, and just so blown away with them. And I remember that night when I saw that Thundering Herd band that I just described to you. They had breakfast set up for them, and they were supposed to play another hour, but there wasn't really anybody left in the room but us. But they were like, we'll go up and play a couple tunes for you guys. What do you want to hear? And we said, can you play like La Fiesta or something off one of the recent recordings? And they go up and they blow this modern stuff, for a couple of minutes.
Wow, that's so cool,
and,
man.
Who would get to see that like that nowadays?
Yeah. Nobody. I mean, yeah. I was just talking to this guy. He might even be watching. Who knows? This guy, Steven Bernstein. You know this guy, Steven Bernstein? He has this band called the Millennial Territory Orchestra.
I think I've heard of that. Yeah.
He has another band called Sex Mob, and he plays a trumpet player. He plays with Little Feat. He's done a bunch of really great rock and roll gigs. And I was talking to him today. He called me just sort of out of the blue. And we were talking about big bands. I love playing in big bands, and I think that for young musicians, particularly if you go to New York, it's still a really important tool to have, to be able to play in a big band, because so many, I think, young people today, they just see it as like sort of a useless thing because there's so little big band work in whatever town you live in. I mean, Austin's pretty unique in the fact that there's like 10 big bands that play here, but in New York, like that's how you meet people generally, particularly if you're a trumpet player, is like playing in large ensembles and big bands. And we're talking about like most people nowadays who are young, like there's no way they could play like a swing dance gig because they've never played music, like they've never played 2-beat music. They don't know how to play that music to make people dance to it. Like you can play Woodchopper's Ball, like you can read the music, but like the way those cats played that song, man, they could play for dancers. And there's something about playing that music all the time for dancers that has been lost now because there's just not the demand for it.
Right.
So it's cool that you got to hear that. Like because the musicians you heard, particularly the older guys, they played for like people in like the 30s and 40s who were like when that music was super economically viable,
Exactly.
So they really knew how to play it, really knew how to play that stuff.
When that
Whereas
was
now,
the popular music, it was
Exactly.
the popular music. I in high school, I had begun maybe in junior high. I had been interested in the drums, and got a drum set and started playing with my dad's record collection. That's how I learned how to play. I never had a teacher. And then in that jazz band in Emerald High, the drummer, the senior, graduated. Nobody else knew how to play swing, and I knew half of the tunes that we played already because I'd already grown up playing them on records. So that's how I became the drummer. But right at that point, as a junior at 17, I got introduced to the society band in town that played the country club dances, and it wasn't as big as a nonet, but it may have been an octet. But trumpet, I think it was trumpet, trombone, 2 trumpets and a trombone, piano, bass, and drums, 2 singers, something like that. But we played a lot of the old swing stuff, and those guys were older. I mean, they were all 30, 40 years older than me. And it was such an education because I learned how to play for dancers, right?
Yeah.
And I learned to appreciate not just doing what was right to support the audience, but the true pleasure in playing and holding down a great swing groove in a tune and just accenting and kicking what's needed for figures and but otherwise just keeping it home and driving it, and there's something there's something that I still just love to this day about that, and it's taken me some time to understand when to pivot and open it up more. There'll be combos you'll be playing in town, that you might, maybe it's a gig that you haven't been on before, or it's a fresh experience, and you're going, well, where's the line? How much did they want me to keep it inside versus take it out? And then you have to be open to feel that in the moment, right? Like
man.
Like the first time I played with you, when we played at
Parker. I think.
Yeah. That was a great gig. And it wasn't halfway through the first number when I began to feel like, okay, I understand exactly kind of what he's looking for here. And we'd met already when you came and sat in with Church on Monday, which is kind of a unique animal unto itself. But
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what you're describing, the influence of the swing era, that is sort of a lost art. And there aren't a lot of players that grew up listening to that stuff for big band. It's long enough now that you're kind of the tail end of the generation of people that were even aware of much of that stuff, right?
Right.
They were still around until I was in college and beyond, but they're gone now. So it's I don't know how much of that we hear anymore. The guy that you're talking about from the Nontet, he grew up around all these players, right? But how many of these cats are left? Not that many.
Well, there's like, the reason he called me, it was I told him I sent him a Facebook message. He's been posting all this music from his band. So this guy, Steven Bernstein, he's like, you would love this cat.
All right.
He grew up, he was in New York in the 70s and saw Cecil Taylor play at in clubs and is hip to Lester Bowie and Chicago Art Ensemble. This guy is but also plays with Little Feat and he just is kind of like this rocker type guy, but grew up in New York in the 70s, or was in New York in the 70s, and had access to all these great jazz musicians. So his musical palette is super deep. And so when you listen to his band, the last record they just did was a sliced Stone record, or Sly and the Family Stone record.
Wow.
So it's his band with this instrumentation of these old territory bands, but they're playing Sly and the Family Stone.
Oh, that sounds cool.
And it's super cool. And he's a great arranger and composer. And so he filters all this music through the lens of a jazz arranger, but it doesn't always sound like quote unquote jazz. And so the conversation we were having was, the comment I left him was man, I'm really enjoying the stuff that you're producing, and man, keep sharing it. And so he called me and was like, what are you doing musically? What's going on with you now that you're back in Texas? And I was like, man, I'm not really doing much, particularly with the pandemic, but I'm not really doing much. And so the whole conversation was basically how we bring as composers the idea of a big band and filter it through the lens of different musics, And so his band, that Millennial Territory Orchestra, I saw them. I got to play at Newport Jazz Festival in 2017, and he was there with Henry Butler, the piano player.
Yeah.
And man, I caught the tail end of their set, and they were kicking ass, man. And it was, it's a nonet with Henry, but the way they presented it was so cool, man. And I shared a bill with them at Summer Stage in 2018, and they were doing some other music, not with Henry, but some other thing that Stephen was commissioned to do. And he brings large ensemble music, and it's kind of jazz, but kind of not. And it's kind of Dixie, kind of New Orleans music, but kind of not. And then they'll play a funk tune. My point is that we have to be able to, as arrangers and composers, repackage that sound to bring it to people nowadays. Being able to play in a large ensemble is still a super valuable thing to do as musicians. But if you're going to be playing dance music from the 30s, it's not really, you can't really come at kids these days with that approach, because
Right.
it's so far removed from what they do and so far removed from the people that they listen to, like, but I guarantee if I put on Steven's record to, any jazz majors at UT, they would love it, because it doesn't sound like, In the Mood. I mean, God knows how many times I've played In the Mood, and we'll probably play In the Mood after all this stuff. But that stuff, it's not, we can't really bring anything to In the Mood that people haven't already brought to it, But there's kinds of stuff we can do with the instrumentation of a big band or a smaller big band. And so,
yeah, well,
I don't know.
I wonder if that stuff has transitioned too into. You talked about Little Feat. I mean, Tedeschi Trucks has a horn section, and Ephraim tours with Tedeschi Trucks, Ephraim Owens, and it's a great sound, and and that is more of
awesome, man.
That's more of a guitar and vocal driven experience. But still, the way to stretch those tunes out, and having a horn section, having that larger format band, there's, as you were saying earlier, there's just so much more potential. For painting different types of soundscapes, right? When you have all of that at your disposal, and maybe that is the future of big band is not, 5 trumpets, 5 trombones, 5 saxes, and all of that, and unless somebody's really got a large club and a huge endowment, But
well, here's the thing about that kind of stuff. That music.
Compacting.
That to have a full. Here's the thing. I'm a big band nerd. I love that stuff.
I do too. Yeah.
If you go to my record collection, over half of it is like these obscure big band records that I've been able to, find on eBay or swap meets or whatever. I love that stuff. But when you're talking about economic viability, big bands are always going to be somebody's passion project. Mm-hmm. Like my nonet, when I'm writing like straight ahead jazz for, like, that stuff's for me. I'm not paying, no one's paying their mortgage on a gig that I hire them for that band, and I'm not making a ton of money off of it. I mean, you make a little bit, but it's that, that's not the purpose of that. And so, and this is a conversation I have with my students sometimes at UT, is like the financial part of it is like, man, it's a really important conversation to have, to be able to take the thing you like and be able to make a living off of it. Yeah. And so, Ephraim's a great example of that, man. Like, Ephraim, as long as I've known Ephraim, he's always had a gig. He's always been on somebody's band, and like, there's opportunity there, but jazz musicians have got to be able to open their lens to bring people into our thing. Yeah, right. Because people are not going to really bring us into their thing, because what we do inherently is going to be more complex than what they do, just the nature of music, But it's just like with that, like any record has got like a really tight horn section on. Like, you want to imagine Stevie Wonder's music without horns, or Earth, Wind and Fire's music without horns.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, but the horn parts for those records that we like, man, they're really complex. But the way that it's all brought together, man, that's how I see the future of big band. Like that, bringing that aspect, that aspect of what we do and bringing it to other things. That's how it'll progress. It's not going to progress by playing In the Mood. It's just not.
Well, and In the Mood was wonderful in its time, right? And and there are settings when, if you're playing a nostalgia gig or something, it's fun to play those old charts. But the idea that the format had to perish with the time is not necessary. I mean,
100%.
There's just so much. The records that I listened to, I loved both small format and big band format jazz, but there was something special about what I got out of those great big band recordings that I listened to growing up that were just like, they're just breathtaking. It's the power of some of the things. They're my favorites from the time I was in 6th, 7th grade, I was listening to that Woody Herman 1963 album with, Sister Sadie and Molasses and Camel Walk, with Bill Chase and all those guys. And,
Yeah, Sal Nistico on that, the great tenor player. Man, what
that recording of Sister Sadie is ridiculous. Talk about chopping wood, right? And and those huge Kenton, with the antiphonal brass kind of mellophone sections and all that, like Adventures in Jazz, Adventures in Time, that whole series of records. Those were records that were winning Grammys for Album of the Year in the jazz category back then. And Woody Herman and a Basie, that Basie and Sinatra at the Sands double album. That classic live recording.
Legendary.
Yeah.
Legendary.
I remember going to the record store and buying that double album for my dad for his birthday, and him putting it on the stereo back when people actually had stereos that were separated from their televisions, which we've gotten back to in our house. I bought a turntable and I'm like, the music's got to be over there. Divorce it from the TV. And it's so much fun to listen to music that way, Crank it up, let it fill the house. It's a beautiful, wonderful experience.
The thing about big band and really good small group jazz is that there's a theatrical aspect to it. And that theatrical aspect of it is like really needed with jazz music, because the music itself is hard to get next to if you're not a jazz musician or a hardcore jazz fan. And so, I really enjoy the theatrical aspect of a big band. Like I played, I was never in the band full time, but I subbed probably over 100 times in the Birdland Big Band.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
The Birdland Big Band always sells out. Like they're never hurting to get butts in the seats. And that band puts on a show, and Ron Wilkins, who's back in Austin right now recuperating, he's a full-time member of that band, and he'll tell you, that band, that band will do like every year they'll do the 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st of December. So they'll do 3 shows every night. So that's, what is that? Almost 21 shows. And I've never done that full run, but I've done like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days of the run, and every single show is sold out, every single one.
Wow!
So people love that sound, they love that power you're talking about. But it's the Birdland Big Band, so they're swinging their asses off. Not every city has a Birdland Big Band, but the idea of presenting music in that format, man, people love that stuff, man.
Yeah.
I'll always go to bat for big bands in that regard. Like, people like big bands. I just was playing with Paul Baker's band before the pandemic, or not. I guess Paul doesn't lead anymore, but whatever it is now.
Right. Yeah.
And there was 25 people in the first 5-6 rows of the elephant room, enthralled. And that's a really good band too. You got to be a good band to get people on your side. But
it's so much
people
fun.
love that stuff, man.
Adrian Ruiz was on earlier, by the way, and says hello. Another great, another wonderful trumpet player in Austin.
I love that guy.
I wish I could figure out. I'm trying to figure out how I can get. I can cover some kind of a license within reason that won't cost me too much to be able to play some vinyl, to play some copyrighted stuff on this show. I would love to pull out some of those old big band records and just let them wail over this.
Man, you ever check out the Francie Boland, Kenny Clark big band?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's the one. I love dropping those records on musicians, because a lot of cats don't know those records.
Yeah.
Because it was a European band, but man, those are some of my favorite big band records.
Do you remember? I'm trying to remember the tune. What is that tune?
That song. Man.
Their recording. I had a record from them. The recording of that tune was freaking mind blowing. It was so powerful.
I have that one on vinyl. I can't remember the name of it. I'm so bad with remembering. I think it's from that record though, called "Let's Face the Music and Dance."
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's from that record. Yeah. I can't remember the name.
What
of
a big band! I had an Oliver Nelson big band album that I loved, that Tom Scott was in the sax section on. I had and just sometimes all-star big band records that you would just see they were put together at some festival for something, and they had all these great players in it. And you wanted to hear that, and that'd be a really cool record. And just so many over the years. That it would be fun to do a show where we just came on and played cuts from needle dropping from our favorite big band albums.
Oh man,
that'd be fun.
that's like I love doing that.
Yeah, if I can get some legal coverage to be able to do that and pay the whatever I need to pay to Piper to be able to get that happening, I would do it in a flash. And I won't give up on that dream. But we should play one more before we call it a night, though, man. What should we?
Yeah, well, So one thing you said though about when you were checking out Woody Herman's band when you were a kid,
mm-hmm.
I think the other great thing about those big bands, and we're hammering the point on big bands home, but I really think they're important for students to play in, because those are, like, for me, that's, nowadays, I think, at least the vibe I get is that young students or young people, they play with people their age,